Hey everyone, and welcome to a very special explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the laboratory for what I like to call Dr. Kim's cinematic masterclass on voltammetry. If you've ever stared at one of those crazy, complex electrochemical graphs and wondered what on earth is actually happening inside that beaker, you are in the exact right place. We're going to break down these dense, highly technical electrochemical concepts into a clear, visual story. It's totally fascinating because electrochemistry is fundamentally about unlocking the invisible conversations happening between molecules and electrons.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our syllabus for today. First up, the concept, then the stage. After that, we'll cover the unsung heroes. And finally, we'll wrap up with the math and the map.
All right, Act 1, the concept.
So what actually is voltammetry? At its core, it's about measuring the current produced by an analyte as a function of the potential, or the voltage, that we apply to a working electrode. Fundamentally, we're forcing a chemical change to happen. By applying this potential, we're electrochemically reducing or oxidizing an electroactive species right there at the electrode's surface. We're deliberately altering its concentration and then just watching how it reacts. Analytical chemists use this all the time because it gives us phenomenal sensitivity over a massive linear concentration range, and that goes for both inorganic and organic substances.
And the waveforms brilliantly illustrate exactly how we apply that force. In voltammetry, we impress a variable potential, called an excitation signal, onto our cell. You've got the classical linear scan, where voltage simply increases linearly with time. But depending on what we actually want to learn, we can get pretty creative. We've got the differential pulse, the step square wave, and the triangular waveform. Now that triangular one is absolutely crucial. It cycles the potential all the way up to a maximum and then brings it straight back down. Keep that shape in mind, because we'll be seeing the results of that specific signal a little later on.
Moving right along to Act 2, the stage.
Welcome to the theater. This is the real-world glass electrochemical cell where the magic actually happens. Just imagine setting this up in the lab. You've got 3 distinct electrodes suspended right there in the solvent. There's a working electrode, which in this specific case is made of glassy carbon. Then you have your reference electrode, which here is silver/silver chloride sitting in dry acetone. And finally, an auxiliary or counter electrode made of a platinum disc. You might also notice a gas line in the setup. That is for ebulliting, basically bubbling, nitrogen through the solution to purge out any pesky, interfering oxygen before we even get started. Now you might be wondering, why on earth do we need 3 separate electrodes? Why not just 2? Kind of like a standard battery. Well, it turns out that the actual measurement of the potential and the measurement of the current interfere with each other. They literally mess up each other's readings, so they have to be performed in different cycles and perfectly isolated. The working electrode is our star player. It provides the exact interface where that charge transfer happens. The reference electrode, it just sits on the sidelines providing a constant, reversible Nernstian baseline for us to measure against. And then the auxiliary electrode acts as a sink, or a source, for the current. It conducts really well, but it doesn't actually react with the bulk analyte, which keeps our reaction isolated exactly where we want it. Connecting the conceptual circuit to the physical tools, we have the operational amplifier Potentiostat circuit alongside some commercial voltammetric electrodes. That Potentiostat is the absolute brain of the operation, controlling the potential and measuring the current. But here's what's really fascinating. Your choice of working electrode totally dictates the exact type of voltammetry you're performing. If you use a dropping mercury electrode, you're doing polygraphy. Slap a platinum electrode in there, and you're set up for cyclic voltammetry. Go with that glassy carbon disc, and you're typically looking at linear sweep voltammetry. Basically, the tool defines the technique.
All right, on to Act 3, the unsung heroes.
So the crucial point here is that we can't just drop our electrodes into a pure analyte solution and hit go. We actually have to add a massive quantity of an inert salt, which is known as the supporting electrolyte. Why? First off, it vastly increases the conductivity of the entire solution. That minimizes something called the ohmic drop, which is basically just the voltage loss to the natural resistance of the fluid. By adding this salt, we perfectly localize the potential difference we're applying right at the electrode-electrolyte interface. And even better, it completely eliminates migration effects, meaning the charged particles move solely due to pure diffusion, not because they're being magnetically dragged around by an electric field. It completely linearizes the transport process. But to achieve this perfect zero electric field assumption, you can't just sprinkle in a tiny pinch of salt. The concentration of this supporting electrolyte has to exceed your actual analyte by a massive factor of 10 to 100. To put that into perspective, imagine trying to find one specific person in a packed stadium of 100,000 people. That is the kind of environment we have to artificially create just so our electrochemical sensors can do their jobs without any electrical interference. It's wild.
And that brings us to our final act, Act 4, the math and the map.
Let's look closely at how we translate our physical setup into hard mathematical data. I know, equations can look a bit daunting, but really, they're just maps of chemical behavior. The math here outlines how we derive the all-important half-wave potential, known as E1/2. Simply put, when the current reaches exactly half of its maximum limit, the potential applied at that moment is defined as the half-wave potential. For a perfectly reversible reaction, this E1/2 is almost exactly equal to the standard reduction potential of that species. But we do have to remember that a lot of real-world organic systems are completely irreversible, and when that happens, those clean, perfect sigmoid curves the math predicts turn into drawn-out, far less well-defined waves.
Now, what's really interesting about this final output is the shape. If you run a triangular voltage scan, remember we talked about that in Act 1, you get a cyclic voltammogram, and electrochemists actually affectionately call this the duck-shaped graph. Here's how it works. As the voltage sweeps forward, the current spikes to a cathodic peak potential, or EPC, as the species is reduced. Then, as the voltage sweeps backward, the species is oxidized, and the current drops down to an anodic peak potential, or EPA. By finding the exact midpoint between those two duckbills, the EPA and the EPC, we can calculate the formal reduction potential of our mystery analyte. It's honestly an incredibly elegant map of a chemical reaction literally reversing itself in real time. But hey, before you go out and start reading every cyclic voltammogram you can get your hands on, you really need to know about a fascinating geographic quirk in the chemistry community. If you're looking at a plot published by a North American electrochemist, the cathodic, or reducing, currents are plotted pointing up, and the positive oxidizing potentials are plotted to the left. But if you're reading a paper from Europe, they typically reverse the axes completely. It's the exact same chemical truth, just mapped with entirely different coordinates. So always check your axes.
So we've covered the core concepts, the physical stage, the absolutely massive role of supporting electrolytes, and those iconic duck-shaped maps they produce. But as we look toward next-generation batteries and highly complex chemical sensing, the environments we're studying are getting way more complicated than simple aqueous solutions. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. How will these core voltammetric techniques evolve to unlock the mysteries of future non-aqueous electrochemistry? Will our classic 3-electrode stage hold up, or is a whole new era of measurement on the horizon? Thank you so much for joining Dr. Chem's masterclass today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we'll see you in the next explainer.